Is Tennessee being overlooked as an SEC title contender? Might depend on who you ask. We have Eric Cain to ask here, Locked On Vols, joining me on the show. Let's start with the quarterback, Eric, because Nico Iamaleava, very highly recruited guy coming out of high school. He sits for a year. Now he's going to take the reins and start. Is he ready to lead Tennessee to contend in the SEC this year?
I think so. In terms of being a leader, in terms of being vocal and all that, that's I'm not saying he's not a leader, but he's not the most vocal guy out there. He just kind of does his business and all that. But he's learning, right? I mean, over spring practice, you can kind of see him communicating, not just at the line of scrimmage, obviously being quarterback things, but between plays, talking to his offensive linemen, talking to his wide receivers, not just leading the offense, but being a leader for this football team. So that's something that he's going to have to grow into. But yeah, I think so from a talent perspective, he's right where everybody wants him to be. He had that great start against Iowa, of course, and that kind of was his, welcoming the college football moment. But of course, we need to see it consistently, and I want to see what he looks like against Southeastern Conference defenses week in and week out. But I think from a talent perspective, I think he's one of the more talented quarterbacks in college football. And if he is who everybody thinks that he is, then Tennessee should certainly be contending for a spot in the college football playoff.
Does it feel like Tennessee and Josh Heupel have the team around him? Because you've got a guy who essentially is going to be a freshman this year. I know he's not, but it's going to be his first full year starting. You're playing in the SEC. You got plenty of tough games on the schedule, and we'll get to that in a few minutes here. But does he have a support system around him where he's not asked to go out and be Superman every week, where they can overcome, making a freshman mistake here and there?
I think so. And I mean, every team's going to have some areas in their depth chart or their roster to where you'd like to be a little bit more stronger. I mean, Tennessee, its secondary is going to be completely new. It's a defense that's gotten better and better every single year. It's a secondary that's gotten a little bit better every single year, but it's still kind of the weak link of the defense, and now you're starting over. I think from a talent perspective, having guys like Jamal McCoy, who I know you're familiar with, and elevating Ricky Gibson, and Boo Carter's a freshman that's going to play a lot in the secondary this year. I think from an athletic standpoint, you're going to get a little bit quicker, and we'll see how that materializes back there. But secondary would be a point of emphasis that I would look at in terms of where Tennessee could come up short. Running back, you like Dylan Sampson. Depth-wise, not a whole lot behind him right now, especially proven. And then I think this is the same case for pretty much every team in the country, to be completely honest with you. Tennessee's got 3 offensive tackles you feel good about. If those guys get hurt, you're in trouble, and that's just kind of where you are. Nature of the beast of the transfer portal. Lance Hurd comes from LSU, where he was sitting behind, it's going to be a top 5 pick probably in the draft next year, and he comes to Tennessee, and he's going to be a plug and play guy. Excuse me, but a lot of guys don't want to sit around for that opportunity. So Lance Hurd coming to Tennessee, that's just one classic example. But to your point, Tennessee's got a really good defensive line. Tennessee's got playmakers on the outside. Tennessee returns a veteran offensive line. You got a quarterback that I think can make it go, and you got one of the most feared pass rushers in all of college football in James Pierce. So I do think Tennessee has the team around him to go and win some games and certainly challenge Alabama and Georgia on the road at Oklahoma, some of those bigger games on the schedule.
Yeah, their schedule is about as favorable gets in the SEC. The Tennessee Volunteers, get this, play just 4 true road games the entire season. There's a neutral site contest in there as well against NC State, but that game's being played in the state of Tennessee, right? Just not at good old Rocky Top.
Charlotte, North Carolina.
Oh no, it's in Charlotte. That's my fault for crossing that up. But still, just 4 true road games, and it's not too far of a trip. I would expect Tennessee fans to travel pretty well for that game against NC State, which is going to be a huge game. I mean, NC State, a team I've been very high on here on the show. I think they've had a great transfer portal offseason. I think they've revamped their weapons. They've got Grayson McCall at quarterback. I like Dave Dorn as a coach. I really like what the Wolfpack are doing there. And if you're talking under the radar non-conference games that have big ramifications for both teams, you could look back at that game and say, hey, that's the reason we made or didn't make the playoff, depending on how it goes.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I don't think it would be a reason Tennessee makes the playoffs, but certainly it could be a win that's quality on the resume, if you will. And I'm not trying to discredit NC State. I agree with you. I think it's going to be a challenging game. It helps it's at a neutral site, but Like you said, I think Tennessee fans will travel, and it won't be a home game, but it is a neutral site. Grayson McCall is a really good quarterback. NC State finished the year, I think, winning 4 of their last 5 games or something like that, maybe 5 straight. As you mentioned, add in the transfer portal. They're getting so much love this offseason. They really are. I mean, ESPN put out its post-spring top 25 the other day, and NC State was 2 spots ahead of Tennessee. So I think it's going to be a pretty solid team. However, I think the books have Tennessee as like a 6.5 point favorite already. I like Tennessee in that game. I just think from a roster standpoint, Tennessee's got more. And so, sure, it's going to be a challenge to week 2 of the season, and definitely not a layup or a slam dunk. But I think that's a game Tennessee can win. And then you go on the road later on to Oklahoma. That's a game that I point to saying, okay, looking back at it, Oklahoma's probably going to finish top 20, top 15 on the road, SEC opener. Nico's first true test in like an SEC atmosphere. I know Oklahoma's new to the conference, but that's going to be a huge game. And then, of course, you come back, you play Alabama at home. You're on the road at number 1 Georgia. NC State's going to be a challenge for sure, but I do think that it sounds like I'm kind of poo-pooing that game, and I'm not trying to, but I think there's bigger games on the schedule, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, my reason for framing it in that sense is there are other massive games on the schedule, but I feel like that one could be the difference between 9-3 and 10-2. Now, as it pertains to the SEC championship game, yeah, Tennessee is absolutely a player in there. I think this is going to be the worst Alabama will be for a few years, which isn't to say they're going to be bad. They're not. They're going to be a good football team. Just relative to what I think Kalen DeBoer can build in Tuscaloosa, this is the most gettable that they will be. LSU not on this schedule. And we talked about the schedule really lining up well for Tennessee. Their 4 true road games are all in conference play. 2 of them are against Arkansas and Vandy. Now the other are Georgia and Oklahoma. Those are going to be really challenging games to win. But I feel like if you win 2 of these games, Oklahoma, Alabama, Georgia, NC State, I feel pretty good picking Tennessee in the rest of those games. And then if you're sitting there at 10-2, whether or not you make the SEC title game or not, certainly if you do, you're in the playoff. But if Tennessee's 10-2 and both losses are in SEC play, and let's say they're to Georgia and Alabama, but they beat everybody else, and Georgia, Bama meet in the SEC title game, I think Tennessee's in the playoff.
No, I would agree with you, and that's where this expanded college football playoff is going to help teams like Tennessee, Missouri, Ole Miss, who are kind of in that second tier. Alabama, I'm still putting in the top tier. Of course, Georgia is at the top. I'm not, saying that they're not. And of course, Oklahoma's, around that category as well. But I mean, yeah, if you finish 10-2 and your 2 losses, Tennessee, for example, is Georgia on the road, Alabama at home, you're in the playoffs, in my opinion. And at that point in time, you're probably like, ooh, I don't have to play in the SEC championship game either. So like, it's almost kind of a bonus as well. Not to say that you don't want to play in the SEC championship, because then you're pretty much guaranteed to be there in the playoffs. But it's almost like another week of rest. So I just, Tennessee does not play Missouri, who's getting a lot of love this offseason, and rightfully so. I mean, you bring back Brady Cook, you got Luther Burden, lose Cody Schrader. I'm not sure about where they are in the trenches, but that's going to be a solid team. Ole Miss, of course, all the transfer portal talk and all that.
Yeah, I'm big on Ole Miss. I like Ole Miss a lot.
In 2021 and came up just short, but not going to play Ole Miss this year. Not playing LSU. LSU was on the roster a couple years ago. So you've got a couple of those big games, Oklahoma on the road, Georgia on the road, Alabama at home, and Florida's always huge for Tennessee. Not because I think Florida's going to be good this year. It's just Tennessee always loses to Florida. But the last time they played at Neyland Stadium, Tennessee did win. So, yeah, if you're 10-2 with losses, certainly to Georgia and Alabama, who are probably going to be ahead of you in the overall standings, you're in my opinion, because I think Tennessee can, or I think the SEC can get at least 4 teams in the college football playoff.
I would think 4. I would think 6 is probably the maximum.
Yeah.
But I mean 3 is the bare minimum. Like,
for sure, yeah.
The 2 teams in the SEC title game are going to be, and then you'll have one team that's 10-2 that doesn't make the title game but gets in. And you know what? That actually kind of makes the SEC title game interesting. I just thought about this. If you're a team like Tennessee or Ole Miss and you go 10-2 and you make the SEC title game, if you win that game, you get an automatic berth and one of the 4 byes.
Yeah.
If you lose that game, you're suddenly a 3-loss team. And I don't know. We haven't seen how the committee's going to value these teams in different conferences and schedules and whatnot in the 12-team era. I think that's. I might have to explore that one day on the show. Just divine inspiration right here.
I think the majority of the time, though, you're not going to make a habit out of having a 2-loss team in the SEC championship.
That's true. That's true.
I understand divisions are going away, so it's not like, oh, they can coast in the West or coast in the East or whatever. But typically there's going to be 2 juggernauts in this league, and you're not going to lose more than 1 game likely on a usual normal year. So, but you're right. I mean, if you are 10-2, you go to the SEC championship, you lose. How's that viewed? We've never seen it before, to your point, and so that'll be interesting if that ever does happen.
Eric Cain, Locked on Vols. Great stuff today. Thanks for stopping by, Eric.
Hey, anytime, man. Appreciate you having me on.
We're checking in on Washington next because, well, the Huskies just keep making moves.